educação. Pensar transforma, muda, é abolição. Freiriana é sua missão. Pensar transforma, muda, é evolução. O conhecimento liberta, vamos transformar. Educar o mundo de dentro pra fora, interpretar. Mundo líquido, monolítico. A solução é alfabetizar, é reinventar. Me dê a mão e vamos para a luta já. Braços abertos, a felicidade encontrar. De braços dados vamos ao outro ajudar. Paulo, pernambucano, franzino, valente, homem de bem, revolucionário, pensador além do seu tempo, destemido como um futuro visionário. Você sim merece uma estátua, meu rapaz. Herói nacional, defensor da cultura e paz. Foi traído, perseguido. Seus ideais foram oprimidos e subjugados. Portanto, amor ao próximo.
Good evening and welcome. My name's Marguerite Horberg. I'm the founder and director of Hot House. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our second program in our year-long series celebrating Paulo Freire, the renowned educator and philosopher. We started the series in September, and we have many programs to come running through April of 2022. So please check out our schedule and come back for all the programs. Tonight we are celebrating and recognizing the extraordinary accomplishments of educators who championed popular education in the Latin and Hispanic heritage, showing two movies, Precious Knowledge and Lucha, and joined by wonderful speakers, Camille Geronimo Lopez and Jose Lopez. The purpose of our series is really to lift up and call to action and celebrate many of the people who've worked in the intersection of popular education, literacy, activism, and social justice. And each month we highlight struggles from those campaigns which have been victorious and successful. I'm going to turn over tonight's program to our host, Rita Sakei, who will introduce the speakers and talk a little bit about the film. If you're so inclined, we'd really appreciate your support. You can donate to Hot House at hothouse.net. In the chats, we'll put the links and to PayPal. Also on Twitch, if you scroll below the image, there's a link to donate there. Your support helps keep these programs free, and we really appreciate that. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over tonight's program to Rita. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month. Next month, I should say, November 17th, we are exploring some of the campaigns that took place in Alaska in the Aleut Bay with Indigenous Peoples Month, and we'll be joined by Judy Hoffman, Doreen Weiss, and Sandy Grande. So please tell your friends and come back. And without further ado, please welcome Rita Sakei. Thank you.
Hi, I am Rita Sakai, and we are here today for the second program of the Year of Education in honor of Paulo Freire Centennial. We are here today with Jose Lopez and Camille Geronimo. Now, Jose Lopez was born in 1950s in San Sebastian, Puerto Rico, and he moved with his family in 1959 to Chicago as part of the massive Puerto Rican migration to the United States. For over 40 years, he has been a leading member of the Puerto Rican independence movement, and he's also the editor of the Puerto Rican Nationalism, a reader. Now, Camille Geronimo is a doctoral student of lifelong learning and adult education at the Penn State University. She has a master's degree in social work from the University of Puerto Rico. Camille has contributed to social justice movements as a popular educator, accompanying organizing processes of communities, cooperatives, social and political organizations. In 2017, she founded the Pueblo Critico, a nonprofit organization led by social workers focused on the design of popular education experiences, methodologies, board games, and planning tools. Now, I would like to introduce the films that we are going to be watching today. Those are two important films that reflect social movements to empower the communities in demand and demand a better education. Both films take place in two U.S. geographical locations, the first being in Tucson, Arizona, and the second in Puerto Rico. The first short film, Lucha, portrays the mobilization of teachers led by the teacher union, parents, and the students when the Secretary of Education threatened to close the school after a climate disaster. In this film, when the community understood the impact of a privatization of the schools and who would end up suffering from that, they started mobilizing together in one strong movement. The second film, Precious Knowledge, portrays high school teachers teaching students about their history, their ancestors, through American government and Spanish literature to value their history and heritage. Both adopt the social justice perspective to their pedagogy, which is the teaching the facts that are not taught in the textbook. For that, they use the word truth, teaching the truth. Now, these teachers adopt the Paulo Freire's principles, and we are about to witness the students' embodiment of Freire's principles as they demanded not to remove ethnic studies from the high school curriculum. I would like to ask Jose and Camille, what were your impressions of both movies, and what is it that what was the most important piece of the movies for you? So we can start with anyone. Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead then, and then you can go, Jose. So I like the movies. I actually hadn't seen them before, so it was the first time. It was interesting because I did recognize the organizing in Puerto Rico. Logically, I was born and raised there, and I only just recently came to the US to pursue doctoral studies. So part of the mobilizations of the International Workers' Day, I have been in those. So it filled my heart basically to see those things on the screen. And I think the two movies present good opportunities to discuss some of Paulo Freire's principles. For example, the defense of public education, a critique of schooling that Paulo Freire engages in with, and problem-based education or emancipatory pedagogy. And we can discuss that, but from the get-go, that was like my first strong reaction to these films.
Yes. That's true. Participatory education, engagement, and yes, these are one of the tenets of Paulo Freire in his education for, some people call education for liberation, education for autonomy, and so, but they are all like a fall in under the same category, I would say. Now, how about you, Jose? What did you think about the movies?
Well, let me just clarify something, and that is that at the beginning you said that it takes place in two parts of the United States. Puerto Rico's colonial situation with the United States, and that came out very clear in the film, is a real problem because most people know very little about Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico has been ruled since 1898 under the doctrine of separate and unequal. In 1901, the Supreme Court of the United States made that decision. And in 1922, it was upheld under Belsic versus the people of Puerto Rico, that Puerto Rico belongs to, but it's not a part of the United States. Puerto Rico is a piece of property of the United States. And in addition to that, I think it's really important that you have in this film the articulation of this oversight board that is a total colonial, classical colonial practice in which you have these men and women who are named by the president and the Congress and can make all the decisions about Puerto Rico in terms of the purse string. Whoever controls the purse string has the power. So that tells you. But it's really important to understand that Puerto Rico this is a decision, the Supreme Court begins in 1901. Puerto Rico is taken over in 1898. And by 1896, we know that the Jim Crow laws are instituted in the US, and that doctrine that shaped the Jim Crow laws was separate and equal. In the case of Puerto Rico, it's separate but unequal. And that is because the Puerto Rican people were framed as a mongrel race that could never, ever hope to be equal to American citizens, even though American citizenship was imposed on Puerto Ricans in 1917, but that citizenship gave Puerto Ricans two rights: the right to leave Puerto Rico without papers, like happened to my family and to millions of Puerto Ricans who now live in the United States, 5.5 million of us residing here, and the right to die for the United States, because then you can serve in its armed forces. And Puerto Ricans have been in the U.S. Armed Forces, dying for the United States since 1917. So I want to make sure that at least the context, and I think to speak about Paulo Freire is to speak about a concept which was so important to him, the concept of concientización. And for him, all education had to be framed around education for what? And for him, that was the basic question. And it had to be education to be able to address from people who are experiencing. Because I understand that some people have, in many ways, sort of put Paulo Freire in the context of class, and I definitely understand that. But Paulo Freire has to be put in the context of colonialism. And what he was talking about was informed a great deal by what was happening in Brazil itself. And when we look at Brazil, Brazil is an epitome of a neo-colonial reality. And when we speak about Brazil, is who are the people that have been left out of Brazilian history. And so one of Paulo Freire's first book was not a pedagogy of the oppressed. His first book, which very few people cite, is Vivir e Lutar, which means to live is to struggle. And that little book, he really focuses on the idea of how education must lead to liberation. So for him, education had to be guided for people who are in a colonial situation, who had to rediscover themselves because they had been taken out of history. It had to be informed by the right of self-determination, the right of self-actualization, and the right to self-reliance. So I want for us to frame this discussion also in that context. And when I see the film about Tucson, it's pretty much about a practice of colonial rule in which you take the natives and the colonized people out of history. And what Paulo Freire said, which Amílcar Cabral said even earlier, that the colonialists take us out of history by saying that we have no history, says they lie, they took us out of history, and through the process of decolonization, we mean to place ourselves into history. So education has to be a process of liberation.
After the hurricane, the devastation was catastrophic in our country. Mercedes Martinez Padilla, and I'm the president of the FMPR, the Teachers Federation from Puerto Rico. As Julia Kelleher was appointed by AFAF, which is a new office that works directly with the Oversight Fiscal Control Board. It's composed of 7 members that were not elected by the people of Puerto Rico, and as a result of the Promesa law that was approved by President Barack Obama. So Julia Kelleher is working for the Oversight Fiscal Control Board that wants to save millions of dollars in education, creating severe austerity measures in the public education system.
Aproximadamente pues más del 50% pues es de educación especial, y aquí pues con mucho amor los maestros pues atienden a esos niños.
Mira, yo llevo en esta escuela a Lorencita Ramírez de Arellano, 29 años. Este es el Teatro Negro Cornelio, es el teatro de la escuela, tiene 8 años de construido. Vienen todos los niños desde el preescolar hasta el 5º grado, toman diariamente el curso de Bellas Artes, la clase de teatro y danza, que es la que yo doy, y usted sigue improvisando. El público no se tiene que enterar que usted se perdió. ¿Entendimos? Sí. Así que vamos. Ninguna otra escuela tiene un preescolar de educación especial con niñitos pequeñitos, y tenemos 3 salones contenidos de educación especial. Además de que más de la matrícula de la escuela son estudiantes de educación especial y se integran en esta clase de Bellas Artes y vienen aquí al teatro y toman el curso todos los días durante 50 minutos.
Mire, antes de que tú termines como Rosario la Aurora, vamos a unirnos.
Saludamos al final, fila. Su autoestima crece, ¿verdad? Porque se sienten seguros de sí mismos, seguros de que lo estoy haciendo bien, de que soy importante, de que tengo creatividad. Arriba subimos y bajamos y contamos 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Y un aplauso. 1, 2 y 3. ¡Gracias!
Abuelas de un niño de educación especial. Estas son las facilidades del salón preescolar. Aire acondicionado. Aire acondicionado. Mira todo el salón para los niños de preescolar. Está en buenas condiciones. Una escuela que no tiene aguas negras, si te das cuenta. Si tú miras las facilidades, tú las ves en buenas condiciones. No sabemos, de verdad que no sabemos, ni sabemos los criterios que tomaron para cerrar, estar en la lista de cierre. Todavía no sabemos cuáles son los criterios.
Los niños aquí, principalmente en esta escuela, en Tuabaja, fue una de las zonas que se inundó hasta unas 12 pies de agua. Nosotros perdimos muchos materiales aquí en la escuela. Muchos de nuestros niños entraron al programa Homeless porque perdieron sus casas. Del departamento nosotros no hemos recibido absolutamente nada.
FEMA no.
¿De alguien del gobierno?
No.
Todos los materiales y todo lo que se ha logrado aquí ha sido producto de la solidaridad de otras escuelas, de esta escuela en Wisconsin principalmente, y de padres comprometidos y miembros de la comunidad.
Emocionalmente ellos se afectan. Aquí hay una terapista de psicóloga que brega con estos niños de educación especial. Ahora mismo no sabemos si en la otra escuela va a tener las facilidades de maestra de educación especial, terapista del habla, tienen terapia ocupacional. Desconocemos si las otras escuelas tienen las facilidades de estos niños, que el porciento es alto en esta escuela.
Ahora mismo nuestro preescolar solamente hay 2 en Tuabaja y 1 es de autismo. Aquí tenemos estudiantes que no son autistas y están en el preescolar. Si nos cierran, pues no hay lugar para esos estudiantes. En la escuela donde se supone que los van a ubicar es una escuela donde van a estar en medio, en la mitad de un salón. El salón no tiene baño, el salón solo tiene una camilla, no tiene las facilidades que esos niños necesitan.
Yo estuve aquí desde los 6 años. Ahora llevo aquí 10 años en la escuela. Y tengo 10 años. Y estoy en esta escuela Lorencita Ramírez de Arellano. Y no quiero que la cierren porque tiene terapistas buenas, maestras buenas y todo bueno.
Soy madre de un estudiante de educación especial del salón de preescolar. Y yo no voy a permitir que a mi hijo me lo encajonen en menos de 4 paredes, que es lo que prácticamente le van a dar. Yo he luchado mucho por los derechos de mi hijo y lo voy a seguir haciendo. Yo voy hasta el final porque no van a cerrar mi escuela ni la escuela de mi hijo.
Decirle a Julia que renuncie, una persona que está cobrando $250,000 para cerrar escuelas, que ni siquiera ha visitado las escuelas que pretende cerrar, que no ha tomado en consideración la opinión de las comunidades, que ella se sienta y le encantan los números y las estadísticas, pero nosotros somos más que números y que estadísticas. No, aquí hay personas, aquí hay unas comunidades.
¿Qué pasó si esta escuela cierra?
Pues la compraría.
La ley 85, de que es la de forma laboral, con esta ley ellos lo que pretenden es hacer una redistribución del dinero del pueblo, porque es un dinero que nos pertenece, es un dinero que pagamos con nuestras contribuciones y demás, es un dinero de nuestros niños y niñas para una educación. Ellos pretenden redistribuir ese dinero y darlo a los empresarios. Esto es un plan sistemático, un plan para desmantelar la educación pública del país, un plan para continuar despojando a los que menos tienen.
Sí, que no me cierren esta escuela porque si no vamos a hacer una lucha.
Ya nosotros hemos ido a Senado, a la Cámara, hemos hecho piquetes, ya nosotros estamos aquí en pie de lucha, no queremos que cierren nuestra escuela.
And the Bill and Gates Foundation, the DeBose Foundation, the Dalton family, all this 1% of the world and of the ones that domain the wealth want more. They just want more and they want to destroy everything they have in their way to do it. In this case, they want to destroy public education in order to privatize to make schools for profit for their friends and the friends of their friends and eliminate public education as they did in New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina. And that's a plan not only for New Orleans, that's a plan for all the states, and that's a plan for Puerto Rico. We have no charter schools in Puerto Rico. We've never had them. They've tried, and we fought back, and we have been able to stop them. But now they approved Law 85, which permits charter implementation in 10% of our schools and voucher programs so they can fund private schools with public money. Puerto Rico is right now facing the biggest attack on public education that it has ever faced. And the attack is so big, the response of the people has to be at the same amount very powerful. So that's what May 1st was all about, and the other steps that we need to take from now on.
Lucha por la libertad. Sueño con la libertad. Lucha por la libertad.
Hoy hay un paro de múltiples sectores contra la imposición de la Junta de Control Fiscal, contra la agenda de austeridad que pretende cerrarnos 300 escuelas, reducir 25% las pensiones a nuestras jubiladas, duplicar el costo de la matrícula de la universidad, privatizar las escuelas a través de los modelos charter.
On International Workers' Day, about a dozen organizations, including activist groups and workers' unions, rallied at Puerto Rico's financial district to protest the new austerity measures proposed by the federally appointed Fiscal Control Board. The organizations marched from different points in San Juan.
Estamos aquí, 1 de mayo, Día Proletario, en un paro nacional donde los maestros y las maestras estamos expresando nuestro repudio a todas las políticas neoliberales que nos quieren implementar por parte de la Junta de Control Fiscal, por parte del gobierno de turno, por parte de la Secretaria de Educación. Y estamos aquí para decirle al gobierno que basta ya. Vamos a conmemorar a los mártires de Chicago allí en la huelga de Haymarket, que dieron su lucha por los derechos que nosotros tenemos hoy día, luchando desde las escuelas públicas. Nos acompañan padres, madres de todas las escuelas de Puerto Rico que están vilmente destinadas a ser cerradas, y aquí estamos para decirle al gobierno que nosotros vamos a luchar y vamos a defender la educación de nuestros niños, cueste lo que nos cueste.
Porque somos la próxima generación y sinceramente confío que somos la generación del cambio, y estando aquí tampoco pierdes un día de clase, estás aprendiendo una manera nueva de aprender en el día de hoy, y es bien importante que cada estudiante esté aquí para que dé el pie de lucha con sus maestros también.
Esta lucha sigue, cueste lo que cueste.
Then all of a sudden the police started throwing the gas.
Oh shit! What was that?
Thousands joined the annual May Day march to add their voice of protest over tough new austerity measures. Cuts to pensions, hurricane recovery efforts and school.
Our students that can be their children, students from the University of Puerto Rico, that all that they are doing is fighting for public education and higher education for all. But when they started throwing the tear gas, they ran after them to their houses, and they arrested. The students got hurt. Students got beaten down. it was an excessive show of force, and they want to silence us. They want us to be scared. And students are brave, and students are not scared. Students are not going to back down.
Como decía ahorita, las personas de la clase alta ven esto como un negocio. Ellos quieren sacar dinero de lo que nosotros hacemos. Por eso la clase obrera es tan oprimida. Así que, pues para nosotros, la clase obrera, los estudiantes, la educación es esencial, es lo que nos va a abrir las puertas.
In order for you to face that, and in order for you to fight that back, you have to organize.
Lucha por la libertad. Lucha, 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 sí. Trega, 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 no. Lucha, 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 sí. Trega, 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 no. Lucha, lucha, sí. Entrega, 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 no. Lucha, 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 sí. Entrega, 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 no.
Ahí. Entrega, no. Lucha, sí. Entrega, no. En la escuela no se vende. En la escuela se defiende.
Y quieren cerrar la escuela, quieren meter la oficina de LEA, desplazar a los niños para poner adultos.
Mi escuela es la mejor escuela de Calle. Mi escuela es una escuela hermosa. Sus estudiantes son muy especiales porque, como pueden ver, está bien cuidada. Los niños aman su escuela. Mi escuela tiene la mejor localización en Calle. Es accesible a todos. Y lo más especial que tiene mi escuela es los servicios que le brinda a los niños de educación especial.
Bueno, mi hija ahora mismo, wow. Mi hija no cuenta con ayuda en otra escuela. Mi hija que ha mejorado. Mi hija fue víctima de bullying en la otra escuela que quiere ser receptora. Mi hija tiene dilepsia y distintas, ¿verdad?, condiciones también.
Personally, I've been here 20 years. Not only I'm the teacher, and I feel like grandma because some of the first kids that I teach, I had the kids now, so I feel like grandma. This is family. Here I had sisters for life.
Escríbelo en tu libreta. Que mi escuela no se cierra. Que mi escuela no se cierra. Escríbelo en tu libreta.
Por eso estamos aquí luchando en pie de lucha por nuestra escuela, porque eso es lo que queremos, que no al cierre de las escuelas.
Y mi escuela está en pie de lucha.
How many schools are there?
Right now there are 1,100 schools
on the whole island?
On the entire island, yeah. They wanted to shut down like 33% of the schools.
Wow.
16 schools were removed from the list the day after May 1st. Obviously, they are feeling the pressure.
Contar del año pasado cómo fue, qué hicieron. Y estas madres también que están aquí hay unas madres nuevas que se han incorporado a la lucha nuevamente de maridones.
No tenemos más opciones porque las únicas dos escuelas que hay están en el pueblo, que son 45 minutos, como dije antes, que lo más importante para el Departamento de Educación, antes que la educación, debe ser la seguridad. Y la seguridad de nuestros niños está siendo violentada y nos están exponiendo nosotros como padres a que pongamos en riesgo la vida de estos niños, trasladándolos a caminar por áreas que no son seguras, por áreas que puede ocurrir un accidente y la vida de estos niños perderse. Y entonces, ¿quién va a ser responsable si uno de estos niños viene un carro, los arrolla, pierde la vida? A quienes le van a radicar cargos a mí por ser mamá irresponsable y caminarlo por un área que no me corresponde, que ya está dicho por el alcalde de este municipio, que por ahí no se puede caminar.
Hicimos campamento, tuvimos más de 37 días en campamento y a lo último, ya en junio, fue que nos dijeron que la escuela se iba a dejar abierta.
Esta comunidad que es ahora mismo la más pobre, con un 97% de pobreza en Fajardo. Y el barrio más lejano, aunque es en Fajardo, del pueblo. Así que nos escuchen, que escuchen a estos padres, que vino un huracán, quiero decir, que arrasó, que muchos de estos padres han perdido sus hogares. Me incluyo ahí que perdí mi casa completamente y estoy en casa de mi madre. Aquí hay otros padres que han perdido todo, pero que es triste decir que ha venido otro huracán más fuerte, que es el Departamento de Educación, haciendo daño emocional, psicológico a los padres y a los niños de una comunidad pobre que necesitan su escuela abierta para brindarles la educación que ellos merecen.
Schools have started to do occupations.
So this is parents who are doing occupations of the schools?
Yeah, parents and teachers and community leaders. Everybody has joined together to defend, their schools.
Estamos aquí con un solo propósito, luchar, no entregamos nuestro patrimonio, nuestra escuela, nuestro interés por la educación de los niños.
Soy maestra, profesora de esta distinguida escuela Luis Muñoz Rivera aquí en Puerto Rico. Estamos dando la batalla, estamos aquí exponiendo las injusticias y los atropellos que tiene el Departamento de Educación de Puerto Rico con la niñez de Puerto Rico, con los maestros y con los padres, con Puerto Rico entero. Esta no es la única escuela que está siendo atacada con estos cierres repentinos, sino que nosotros estamos abogando por todas las escuelas de Puerto Rico. No, el campamento ha comenzado apenas una semana.
Mírala, qué linda va, la escuela Luis Muñoz Rivera, que no da ni un paso atrás, que no da ni un paso atrás, que no da ni un paso atrás, que no da.
Estamos aquí en pie de lucha. Nadie va a sacar ningún equipo y toda la comunidad respalda.
Mi escuela no se vende, mi escuela se defiende.
Debt is illegal, that we can't pay that $72 billion debt, that it needs to be abolished, that we want the Jones Act to be abolished so we can commerce with countries that want to help Puerto Rico that have been denied the right to do so, that we don't want any more austerity measures against our children.
Puerto Rico has been a colony first by Spain, and the Spaniards really attempted to eradicate our original Puerto Ricans, which were the Taino Indians. And fortunately, we're incredible. The Taino Indians merged with our black African slaves that were brought to work on the island by the Spaniards and created the cimarrones. And the cimarrones were the first urban guerrillas here in Puerto Rico. Then, of course, the United States invaded us. If you look at Latin America or any nations of struggle, you come to Puerto Rico and say, oh my God, Puerto Rico's a paradise. It's a paradise invaded by U.S. imperialism. I really believe that my nation is a people of resistance. For a country 35 by 100 miles, to be able to get the United States Navy out of Vieques, to be able to bring home 11 my co-convicts and Oscar Lopez, who was my co-defendant, out of federal prisons, I think we have a lot of power.
Es parte del modelo de poder, del modelo económico que pensando que reprimiendo a los manifestantes, reprimiendo un pueblo, va a hacer que el pueblo coja miedo y se calle. Todo lo contrario. El pueblo ya está perdiendo el miedo, el pueblo se está movilizando para todas las medidas de lucha que tenemos que dar, y que esto que hizo la Policía de Puerto Rico no va en nada retroceder la lucha que el pueblo de Puerto Rico va a hacer. Todo lo contrario, vamos a redoblar nuestros esfuerzos, vamos a redoblar nuestra lucha para evitar que nos roben el país.
Pero la única solución no es sacar a la Junta, la solución es la independencia de Puerto Rico. Pero como un primer paso hacia ese proceso de descolonización, necesitamos sacar a una Junta dictatorial que fue impuesta desde el Congreso de los Estados Unidos para imponernos unas medidas de austeridad por una deuda que no fue creada por el pueblo. Nosotros apostamos porque un proceso de descolonización es la solución, pero como parte de ese proceso de descolonización se tiene que derogar la ley promesa y se tiene que eliminar la Junta de Control Fiscal, y el gobierno de Estados Unidos tiene que sentarse a negociar con el pueblo de Puerto Rico nuestra total y absoluta liberación.
La única solución para todos los problemas que tiene este país es que esto sea una república independiente, que tengamos los poderes de una república para poder manejarlo de la Junta. La Junta está impuesta por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, decretando una dictadura implícita que la única forma de poder salir de la Junta sería siendo una república independiente, no hay otra forma.
Planteamos que necesitamos, la independencia que necesitamos para Puerto Rico no es estrictamente una jurídica, sino que necesitamos independizarnos de ese capital económico explotador que llega a través de nuestro modelo colonial, pero que también es parte de las tendencias imperialistas y capitalistas que vemos alrededor del mundo, y que lo único que han hecho esas políticas económicas es destruir el futuro de los países y de los sectores más desventajados.
Puerto Rico has been long enough being a colony, first from Spain for almost 400 years and from the U.S. for more than 100 years. I think that independence itself would not do it. It has to be independence with socialism. You know, this is a class struggle where the workers are the ones that rule our country. So that's what I hope for, and that's why we are fighting, and that's what we want to build for our children.
Las luchas obreras no tienen fronteras. Las luchas obreras no tienen fronteras.
Estamos aquí en solidaridad para dar la mano a la clase obrera que ha pasado un tiempo muy difícil en Puerto Rico, y porque sabemos que no hay fronteras en cuanto a los ataques de los jefes y la clase rica. Nosotros venimos aquí de los Estados Unidos porque también estamos bajo un ataque. Todo como los Estados Unidos, el laboratorio principal de los ataques se reproducen aquí en el mundo global. Sabemos que hay una lucha y una clase.
We know what the agenda is. It is to go in there and build their hotels and build their condos and bring more white rich folks there to create their own little islands where they can sip martinis and do whatever they want in those spaces, and have the very brown people that was their history and their culture be the servants. We know what it looks like. We see it in Detroit, where they close hundreds of schools, and parents and students are dealing with the aftermath of that. We are clear on what their agenda is, and it is not about giving black and brown parents choice. We have a governor, and Governor Cuomo, who has done everything in his 8 years to dismantle what public education looks like and ensure that his rich hedge fund billionaires, the same ones that have bankrupted Puerto Rico, let's be clear, are over here getting what they want here too, which is more charter schools, the dismantling of public and parent voice and youth voice and what happens in public education, and the sabotage of our public schools here by not funding our public schools, of which $4.2 billion is owed. So we're here in solidarity. Where else will we be? It absolutely makes sense. Since we are black and brown people, we see across this country that we are clearly under attack on all levels. We will not allow one of the last public bastions that we have right now to be dismantled. And so just like every other time in history, when people come for us, we come right back at them. And we stand in solidarity as parents, as educators, as young people, as people just care about children, to say no more, no more.
Esto es un crimen que se está cometiendo contra la clase trabajadora y contra todo Puerto Rico. Decimos basta ya, porque sabemos que somos más, porque sabemos que tenemos la razón y porque sabemos que vamos a vencer todos unidos y todos unidas. Así que lucha sí, entrégalo. Lucha sí, entrégalo.
If you a freedom fighter, real rider, organizer, young law panther type, freedom time. Sueño con la si no me la dan tendrá que preparar el contraataque, lucho por la sé que peleamos, sé que luchamos, sueño con la ya quizá fuera, no a la guerra te digo, lucho por la si no me la dan tendrá que.
When I think about protecting your history, and in the U.S. it would be the indigeneity of our Latino community. Of course, not all Latinos are indigenous, but most of the students that are left out are what we call brown people. Yes. And black people, black and brown people. And in our countries, in Latin America, we do have this mix. We have the indigenous people, we have the black people, and Brazil is an example of that. So this is an important point. And So I was not familiar with that book that you mentioned. I'm going to look for it. Viver y lutar. Yes.
Vivir y lutar.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then you mentioned the conscientization. So which we sometimes hear as critical consciousness. And so this phenomenon of bring consciousness, but not only ser consciente, right? It's not only be conscious about what's going on. It's a very target consciousness. So you need to be aware of, and in the movie they say institutions, right? Yes. The power of this power play between institution and everybody else, the people, the students. So I think I want to add that I think Paulo Freire in his later books, he talked about, he was able to come up with a methodology to teach, right? This teacher, I think his name is Jose, the American government teacher, he mentioned reading the world, which is being able to see what happened, what this power play, who is benefiting from that, who is getting rich, and who is losing from that, who is suffering. So I think this is part of his methodology, which I call critical literacy. And you may have heard, Camille, you may have heard it too, but it's in terms of literacy. To me, one of his greatest contributions is to create this methodology of read the world, and yet you read the world, which is the discipline, American government or Spanish literature, to give an example, or even the privatization of schools, right? So this is, and then you have to take action. So Paulo Freire was great about saying practice. So I think those are two great points, and I really appreciate that you brought the idea of a consciousness, conscientization. Yeah. Now, and I think maybe if you could speak a little bit, and both of you, right, about the process of a consciousness, and how do we, I know it's all about la lucha, and hopefully this will change, it will bring change. And so maybe you can speak a little, if you could talk a little bit more about how do you see the change happening, or is this action enough? Is taking action always a hopeful message? Please tell me a little bit about this action piece that we saw in the movies, and it's proposed by Freire. To taking an action is actually extremely important for things to change. Yeah. I'm not sure who wants to start, but yes.
What do you think, Jose?
Go ahead.
Are you ready, or do I start?
No, you start.
Okay.
No, you start.
Well, first of all, gracias. I do want to appreciate the point you made about Puerto Rico's colonial status. It's something that we Puerto Ricans find trouble explaining, mainly because we are living in times where other countries are talking about coloniality and are talking about the colonial subjectivity and how to decolonize from there. But for all, it's a present legal circumstance beyond a historical, that it's not just a historical past and a page that we flipped along the way. So thanks for that, because yeah, it's hard to explain that we are that we don't acknowledge ourselves either as part of the U.S. I think that we can all say with certainty that Paulo Freire would defend schools even when he had to criticize them, mainly because schools are spaces for social relationships, for humans to study, to engage in conversation, to even confront each other, and discuss and make politics. And I think the COVID circumstance tested our limits when it comes to that, because through the screen, there are only so many things we can do, but then there are others that we are suspended from, which is the continuing face-to-face relationship where we can see difference, inequality, and we can find more things to fight for. But because of what we learned in schools, we are also able to teach today, regardless of the circumstances in which that happens. So in that sense, he defended public schools and the access to education because it represented that place for encountering, but also organizing resistance against oppression. And we can see that in Lucha C, right? When in the aftermath of the 2 hurricanes that hit the island in 2017, students and teachers and parents gathered to prevent the closing of the 179 schools, and also to fight back against the neoliberal agenda to privatize the school system through charter schools. But we can also see that in precious knowledge as well. Like when students mobilize to define their ethnic studies curriculum against senators associating student cultural dialogues and ways of conducting these classes, and their critical thinking with anti-American indoctrination. So in both cases, the school represented a place from where to challenge the status quo, a place for permanent resistance. And in Pedagogía de la Indignación, which in English has been published as Pedagogy of Indignation, he argues that for those who stop resisting, it is easier to accommodate and believe in the impossibility to fight for justice because nothing will ever change. So his notion of resistance is pretty permanent, and it's totally related to the possibility of change in the world, understanding that it is dynamic, rejecting that idea that change will come on its own, so that we kind of give up to spontaneity because it will happen when it happens. And in the meantime, I will have fun and the YOLO type of slogan of living your life once and not using the life to sweat the troubles and the struggles that we're going through. So he would defend schooling, but also have a critique of that schooling, because yes, it could be helpful to transform reality, but it can also maintain the status quo. So he came with this concept of banking education to describe how students were like presumed as empty vessels to be filled with knowledge, and critique that type of education because it was like anesthetizing students in a way to be submissive, to believe that the world is unchangeable, to believe that knowledge is somehow static, and that their formation will be completed when degrees are finished. So you end up your elemental, middle, like high school education when you get the diploma. And if you don't get the diploma, you're actually not educated yet. So he challenged that perspective of the places even you learn, and in this, the school was not the only one. But in precious knowledge, the students you see give accounts of this type of schooling that does not serve their interest, that does not make them passionate about learning as a lifelong activity, that reproduces an understanding of history where like their contributions as culture are not present. And we as Puerto Ricans are very familiar with this phenomenon of not seeing ourselves in books and in having an interpretation of our history that it's very limited and very stigmatized, and pushes forth further racism as a narrative. Yeah, it gave me goosebumps when those senators in the movie were saying that by not including that in the books, they were promoting like a more equal culture. And I want proof of that. I found that very hard to believe. And in that case, and in those books, the story that is presented second placed other narratives, because what should be revered and admired is the so-called founding fathers and their vision for America. in the schools in Puerto Rico, we learn English is imposed as a language and has been one of our cultural affirmation trenches. But the history that we learn is very, it's very interpreted and written by the colonial forces. So you learn in your third grade that Puerto Rico lives in an amicable relationship with the U.S. And to learn to challenge that, it will take a lifetime, because the whole system is built about that, and it's prioritizing the history of the U.S. and indigeneity being even like a passive type of culture that received and welcomed the colonial forces. The Spanish rule first, and then the U.S. So I have another things on conscientization, but since this is a conversation, I would like to pivot this and give Jose a chance to, or you read it.
And Camille, I think you made a great point, right? You said that in that pedagogy of indignation, he says, you critique your school and you love your school, right? So there is this relationship, or you are helping improve the school. So it's never being conformed with the way things are. So I think that's that's extremely important point. Because when my research is about the literacy campaign in Cuba in 1961. So I went back a little bit in the historical context of Cuba. And I do not want to spend a lot of time talking about that, because we are going to have a conversation in December. So our topic in December is the literacy campaign in Cuba. But the one thing I want to mention is that Cubans are very critical about their education, but yet they are very fond. They always love, their country, right? So it's genuine. And I interviewed them 60 years later, but they still go back and say, that campaign was all about love. And so I have been reading a little bit about love, and not forget our histories, right? No history is perfect, but you have to be always critical about your own country, your own education, your country's education, and so forth. So I think you bring an important point. And I have a quick question for you about the Puerto Rican history not being omitted in the textbook. Do you know any teachers, and this is a question for both of you, but do you know teachers that might include, some people call hidden curriculum, but you talk about the history, maybe, in any part of your teaching. Do you know folks or teachers that do that? You've got to, right? You're in Puerto Rico, not talk about Puerto Rican history. It's like, okay, what? Maybe we do not know the whole story, but what do you think?
I would, let me just say several things. One is your, obviously your point on critical literacy, and then Camille's point about Puerto Rican. So I just want you to understand that this coming year, we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of a school that we founded in Chicago. The school is named after the Puerto Rican patriot, Pedro Albizu Campos, who is one of the people that in Puerto Rican history, you must ignore, hate, and think he's crazy. And by the way, if you read carefully and analyze the teachings of Pedro Albizu Campos, they anticipated a lot of the thoughts that would drive Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is informed a great deal by the theology of liberation in Latin America. And I think that's something we cannot leave out. There was a theology that was based on reflection and action. It was truly a praxis. And I think Paulo Freire was informed. So Paulo Freire was not this genius who invented these ideas, he was literally taking on from other ideas that were being discussed at that moment. And I think that's really important to situate that. When we founded our school in 1972, by the way, I met Paulo Freire in 1974, not for a very long time, but he came here to address a group that we founded as a result of our school. We started our school in 1972. 1974, we held a gathering that led to the creation of something called the Alternative School Network in Chicago, which, by the way, still exists. And Paulo Freire was invited to give the keynote to the founding process. But our school obviously is informed by what had happened to Puerto Ricans in Chicago. And so we always talk about the idea, and to me, the film on Tucson was very important in the sense that Mexicans and Native people have been denied their history. In Arizona, one of the centers, if you go a little bit up north, perhaps the founding place of the great civilizations of Mexico, because the Mexica people migrated from that region southward and created Tenochtitlan, the greatest city on earth, in 1519 when Hernan Cortés arrived. But what I want to say is there's a wonderful book, by the way, that I want to cite by this amazing anthropologist, intellectual who died a few years ago, Ralph Trudeau. He wrote a book, Silencing the Past. Silencing the Past. That's what colonialism has done to all people of color throughout the world, throughout the darker nations of the world. And so I that's why I want to place this in a colonial context. And so in 1968, I graduated from an inner city high school here in Chicago. I had gone through an apartheid, literally an apartheid educational system. When I arrived in Chicago in 1959, I was in my third grade. I was immediately demoted to second grade. At that time, they used to have grades that were, every grade had A, B, C designation. The C were the kids who were supposed to be the worst. All the Puerto Rican kids that I was demoted with were placed in 2C. Now, we were in third grade. Now I'm in 2C. What happened in 2C? Well, you went to the classroom, and the first thing they did was the teacher put you on a table to sit on a table, literally almost the entire day, in a space called the coat room. At that time, they did not have lockers, and so your coat was placed in this adjacent room next to your classroom. In that space, all the Puerto Rican kids in that class were kept. And only when the teacher had time, she would come and spend some time with you. In 1969, I was selected. I was at Loyola University. I was selected to become a research assistant to the first study that was conducted on Puerto Rican education in Chicago. It was published in 1970, titled Puerto Rican Dropouts. Dropouts. That's a really interesting word. Numbers and motivation. And what we concluded in that study is that 72.9% of the Puerto Rican kids that entered the Chicago Public High School dropped out. But what was worse than the numbers was the theme that I picked up as a research assistant. And the theme was, teachers hear me, they don't listen to me. Teachers hear me, they don't listen to me. So I decided I was going to go into teaching. I started teaching in 1971. I came back to my high school to teach. And at that moment, I was able to enter a space which I had been denied the right to enter as a student. That was the teacher's lounge. And I went into the teacher's lounge and I opened the door, and there on a sofa in the teacher's lounge is my ex-English teacher. She's asleep, and she had put up a sign which read, "Do not disturb Puerto Ricans at work. Do not disturb Puerto Ricans at work." Now think about it. Think about what I just said about teachers hear me, they don't listen to me. Now, that was my wake-up call. Why? Because this white teacher had been my teacher. She had treated me very, very nicely. She had been exceptionally good to me. And then I realized I'm a light-skinned Puerto Rican who, because I was a nerdy kid, became the exceptional native, the exceptional Puerto Rican. So that opened the doors for them to open the doors for me. This is what is the horror of education even today in public schools. So I would be, I'm a strong supporter of teachers and teachers union. But I ask the teachers union, when will you have a plank in your program that will say, sometimes teachers have to be uncomfortable in order for the students and the community and their parents to be comfortable. That's the day I will support a union 200%. Because to me, the problem is in a lot of the school systems in the United States is that you have most of them still, the teachers are white. They come with a white perspective, a Eurocentric concept of knowledge. And what I'm coming back to is what you raised about critical literacy. What Freire was challenging us to do is to engage not in egocentric critical thinking. He was challenging us to engage in collective critical thinking. And so for him, the world, what was a good school? A school and a teacher. For him, at least that's my interpretation, the only thing that they did not, schools do not create knowledge. They do not produce knowledge. Teachers do not create knowledge. They do not produce knowledge. Universities do not produce knowledge. They do not create knowledge. Instead, a good teacher helps and sort of indulges his or her students in a process in which a student can critically analyze the world by understanding critically the world, acting upon that world, and most importantly, transforming that world. Mm-hmm. To me, that's what concientización really meant. Understanding the world about me, obviously acting upon that world responsibly, and most importantly, transforming. So for me, that is a decolonizing model of education. And that's what led us to create an alternative high school here in Chicago in 1972, which, by the way, will celebrate 50 years this coming year.
Well, that's congratulations in the anniversary, Jose. That alternative school is called the
Pedro Albizu Campos.
Albizu Campos. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And I would like to, I have heard about it. I would like to read a little bit more about it. In fact, I tried to visit once, but I think it was during vacation. But I heard about the alternative school work that has been done there. I still have so many questions, right? You are a source of wealth. But Camille, would you like to?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to you and also shout out in doing so to the many professors that I had along the way. I had different sides of this coin in terms of problematizing reality, but I did have professors that later, when I went to the university, were like comrades in student movement organizing and supporters of students movement too, that find their ways to communicate ideas, to engage in students in discussions, but also it wasn't like a propaganda type of education for the left, which is a risk here. And I want to get back to that, because it is one thing to receive a message in which you're not listening or you're not reading into, and try to challenge that with a counter narrative of rebellion and what has been our history in Puerto Rico. And it is another thing, which is not always present in this case that I was bringing, of professors that are valuing each students where they come from and what they have to contribute to the present and future, which is a non-dogmatic way of presenting history. So I had this professor, Ali. So Ali Tapia, he's a musician and he's a teacher too. And I remember a particular assignment he gave us to go back to our families and interview, like do this oral history project to interview our grandfathers or grandmothers if they were alive. And in doing that, I was able to restate in my head the history of my paternal family, which is Dominican, and in ways that other students could knew, hey, like Puerto Ricans, we are very proud. We're a very proud people. Like but we're also constituted of this Caribbean history. And in doing that, that was elevated in a way, the relevance of immigration patterns in the Caribbean and our history. So by doing that, he provided the room for us to question our history from the left and from the right, for example. So I think that also to the point that Jose was bringing, like banking education has that way of subordinating students, suffocating rebelliousness, repress curiosity too, and kind of de-stimulate the capacity that we can have to defy, to take risks, to basically become these passive subjects, right? And as a response, problem-posing education came to be, or educación problematizadora, where we develop that critical consciousness about topics to challenge situations and concrete problems that are confronted by learners. And in his writings, from my interpretation, it is a method of knowledge and learning, but also an attitude towards reality. So we see that in Precious Knowledge, the students are kind of exploring concrete problems in that community. They mention language discrimination, military recruitment, segregation within the schools, or how security is treating students. So these are like generating topics, right? So the students are reflecting on this situation, understanding what their place in that reality as subjects, trying to find solutions, and the teacher is accompanying that process and helping them find solutions. And that process of being exposed, but also developing their own say about it, along with the actions that are needed to confront the way things are, this, for me, resumes the process of conscientization. So it's not just being aware, or it's not understanding a message, or like we have this a phrase in Spanish, which is bajar línea, or which means like transmit a message. And when we often mobilize under this slogan, right? What the moment we understand the analysis of reality and the actions we can do to confront these situations as a connected process of action and reflection, there is the praxis that in itself enables and speaks of conscientization as a process, and not just now being articulated on this particular topic or the other, but having a commitment towards it. And we can also see that in Lucha C, we can see that the film, I don't know, Jose, you tell me your input, but the film kind of starts with the schools being closed and communities responding to it. And that is like the first feeling that we have. And then it goes, as the film goes deeper and deeper, it dives into the roots of the problem. So it started to mention PROMESA, like the Financial Oversight and Management Board. And it is said that it was passed by Obama and that its mere goal is to collect or to resolve the national debt crisis by collecting debt regardless of social welfare, workers' union, pensions, school, education budgets, and whatever. And then there are other teachers and organizers connecting PROMESA to the colonial situation of Puerto Rico and to a bigger global context of capitalism and neoliberal projects. So it is my hope to participate in process of conscientization and decolonization in which students and teachers can get to this analysis and not just one sector. Because in that articulation of the problem are part of the things to be solved, but not all people organizing or participating in movements are there long enough or deep enough to engage in the conversations that would get us to a better understanding of what's happening in the island. So it kind of brought many things to me regarding the agenda that it's pending and possible with social movements back home.
So very interesting, Camille. So you're saying that because Lucha C is a more recent film.
Yeah.
So you, I'm not familiar with La Promesa, did you say?
PROMESA, that's the law that was passed that imposed the oversight board.
Okay, so you what you just mentioned is something that we go through in the present day. So let me just make sure that I'm understand what you said. You said that everybody that is part of the social movement, parents, teachers union, and students need to take part in the problematization and the process of understanding and the process of transformation action in order to transform, to make the change. Is that what you just
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those are complex problems, right? When you talk about the management of the money, they go through a different route. That we know that in the government they try to go through different doors in order to cover, right, what the real issue is, or to distract them. And we saw in the past administration, we saw a lot with the President Trump doing that, right? He is bringing attention to social issues and gossips, and then on the back they are doing other things that we don't see. So I think it's so important and it's so complex, but not impossible for our workers, right? Our parents, working family parents, to see that, to understand that. But it's also a long process, right? I mean, because literacy, and you work with adult literacy, and at Cuban, the literacy campaign in Cuba was adult literacy, but it's possible. It's possible, but it has to be very much collective, right? And we mentioned just in this hour many times the importance of collective. And the Cuban Leaders Campaign involved everybody, right? So it worked out because everybody was part of it. So participatory education was in place. What I do not know is if everybody was in the same process of consciousness, right? But they had different groups, right? So this is a different conversation, but it's a great point. I think it's something that I think you kind of answered the question that I had for the education for today, because it's going to be almost like us. I think we are going to be, I mean, unless we want to continue the conversation, but I think we are going to be ending. This would be the last question, right? What can we do for education today? So we have cases of opening alternative schools. We have cases of teachers union working with the parents and families and resisting, so they don't privatize the schools. So anything else that you would like to bring to our conversation as how we can change our schools and make our schools that address our students that are indigenous, that are Latinos, that are maybe, and specifically Latinos, right? We are today we are discussing Puerto Rico and maybe a little bit of Latinos, but anything else that you would like to add for today's education?
So Rita and Camille, I definitely want to invite you, and I will get an invitation to you next year in June. We will be hosting a conference on the foundations of our school. It will be held here in Chicago. It inaugurate our 50th anniversary. And some of the questions, the question you're asking is, where do we go from here? I think that's part of the question we want to be able to answer in terms of the next 50 years. But I said several things. One is that the theology of liberation in Latin America was informed about the idea that you create parallel institutions. It doesn't mean you left the schools and you don't struggle to improve the schools. It means that there are some real immediate needs that our young people have that's based a great deal on generational and historical trauma that somebody has to take responsibility for. And that is why we developed an alternative high school. And we've developed alternative high school that right now in Chicago, we have a public school charter school in one charter that is not profit. It is 23 small schools in the Chicago public schools that are informed to serve the most marginalized kids. We have 4,000 students, mostly Latino and African Americans, in those 23 schools. And our school is all sort of the beginning of that process. So I want to invite you to that. Second, I think the other point that I think is very important is the idea of knowledge itself. I said that knowledge, schools do not create nor produce knowledge. There is, in Paulo's Freire, he cites Mao Zedong, but there's a wonderful quote from Mao Zedong that he sent to the Communist Party in the 1930s, because obviously it was a party of cadres and they thought they knew it all. And he writes to them, give back to the people. Your role is to give back to the people with precision what they have given you in confusion. Imagine what is the role of schools to help to organize and systematize knowledge with critical literacy. That's it. It's not to memorize. It's not to create a banking system of education. It is to ultimately, the people are giving you the knowledge. They know their oppression. They know what they live. Ours is to help them organized and systematized. Give to them back with precision what they have given you in confusion. And I think that's a wonderful quote about education. And the third point I want to make is that we can't talk about education generally without really talking about a decolonizing model of education and without mentioning one of Paulo Freire's great companions in many ways, who was Frantz Fanon. And Frantz Fanon writes a wonderful book, which I consider one of my Bibles, and that is The Wretched of the Earth. And he says that the whole system of knowledge of the white supremacist colonial system is to reduce the colonized to the quintessence of evil. And that's why we criminalize Black and brown youth. That is why we create a discussion about gang violence and violence as if it was rooted in people's genetic. And we've got to get away from that. And many teachers even learn to believe that. And that is why we propose so much the idea that we have to have police in the schools, because we got to control the natives. We got to get rid of that garbage. And so for me, those are 3 points that I wanted to make in this discussion before we leave.
Most of the books, you pick up a history book and you don't really see any other cultures in there, but, you know, mostly Caucasian, white people.
Ethnic studies is the knowledge of other than your own ethnicity.
Not only learning about the past of the U.S., but also learning and having the opportunity to learn about our cultura.
My grandpa and my grandma taught me to be proud that I'm Mexican. And these classes helped me because I actually know my history now.
For someone that's felt so out of place, it feels good to have a home.
The way things were going, I probably would have just left school. Like, this space saved me in a way.
I'm calling on Tucson Unified School District to shut down the ethnic studies program.
Raza studies, African American studies, Asian studies, it's about their race. And that is contrary to American ideals.
The program is administered by vehemently anti-American and anti-Western civilization zealots.
It's hard to tell if the criticism is based upon full knowledge that they're lying or they just have been totally misguided in what they've heard.
It's people like you that come over here and ruin everything that we have settled. I'm a Mexican and very, very proud of it.
Our students are graduating at a much higher rate. Our kids are going to college at a much higher rate. That is giving our students greater opportunities in life.
The superintendent of schools can himself declare these courses to be illegal, and so today I'm announcing that decision.
They can't take it away. They can't. I want to go to college because I need to set that example for my sisters, but it's a struggle.
I was the oldest, so I always had to, same way as Crystal, staying home and, having to take care of the kids at so young, age, when she actually could do something better.
¿Con quién duermes en la noche? ¿Quién te cuida? ¿Quién te compra todos tus toys?
Mi mom.
You little liar. She said you buy her all the toys.
I'd rather her, get her education and everything and keep on going. But it's been hard. It's been very, very hard, for us, especially her high school years, trying to get through and everything.
Just to be together in one room with like my whole family, that'd be great.
Te damos gracias por estos alimentos que tú provees. Te pedimos que los bendigas.
My dad went to the DMV, and then as time went by, you know, we started to get worried because he was only going to the DMV. And he hadn't called us and he wasn't picking up his cell phone. And then Bob ended up calling us and he told us that our dad got picked up and that he was in a holding cell.
He was arrested and now he's in jail because they found out that he was undocumented. You know, it's hard, you know, the first time you see him and he's like behind the glass and he's wearing like the orange jumpsuit and you couldn't even have physical contact. Like it just hurt that like you could only talk to him over the phone.
If he doesn't get to come back here legally, then he might not come back at all. Things like Christmas cards or like tickets. School freshman year wasn't what I wanted, so I stayed home.
My dad was like, you need to go to school, you need to get your education, and I was like, I don't feel like going to school today.
When you grow up in a poor area, you don't have the same chances as other people do. We all grew up in my nana's house. It was my mom and her other 7 siblings and their kids all in like a 5-bedroom house. It was really crazy. My dad was never around because he like totally just booked on us. I've pretty much been around everything, drugs, gangs. Where I originally grew up, those people, most of them are locked up or dead. I'm not gonna lie, I've hated education. You know, sometimes I feel like the education system is just so against me that they don't want me here, that they want me to just drop out.
What I notice, especially in regular history classes, is students who really just don't give a shit about what they're studying historically. I mean, their relationship to learning is just kind of dysfunctional in general. And it's not of a particular ethnicity, but they are lazy. They are unengaged. They really are. Learning has just become irrelevant to their lives completely. They're just damaged. They're culturally damaged.
So step 1 is to identify the problem. Now, I think the way that you've cast kids is so funny because if you read the literature historically, it's exactly the way it talked about you when you were a kid. Right? It's exactly the way they talked about me when I was a kid. Right? We were apathetic, we were disengaged. The same narrative about the deficiency of our children has run the history of public schooling in the United States. Right? And we just changed the way we explain our inability to engage kids. Right? There's nothing wrong with kids. I've never met a kid with a dysfunctional relationship to learning. I've met a lot of kids with a dysfunctional relationship to school.
Approximately 50% of Hispanics drop out of school year after year, and the numbers are not improving, they're getting worse. We continue to perpetuate an educational experience that has been inadequate, at best, for the majority of Latino children. Without that diploma, you're walking on this world with limited opportunity, limited chances. You are the one that's going to be out there being exploited for $8 an hour. They're using second grade children of color data to determine what number of prisons they're going to need in the future. So the idea that we are still losing these huge number of kids is appalling.
And this problem has aggravated over 4 generations.
Chicano teachers, counselors, Chicanas in the classroom, you didn't see them.
Now, in some schools, you couldn't speak Spanish even at lunch or when you're out hanging out on campus. Later on, a civil rights study found that corporal punishment and punishment in general was meted out to minorities at a 4-to-1 ratio. And those kids knew that inside the school.
Many Chicanos and Chicanas were being relegated to vocational classes, secretarial classes. In fact, I had 4 years of air conditioning at Tucson High, and not enough was done to get us into college.
We knew that we had a school board and a superintendent that basically ignored and if at the best benign neglect to this community and to this population. And so it's just a question of time.
The practice here has been one of domination, the Anglos dominating the Latins. But the Mexican Americans say that day has ended, that they are on the move, that they will have a piece of the action.
It was like a Chicano movement nationwide.
It was kind of a renaissance period for us. There was an urgency for us to make a statement here in Tucson, and the statement was the walkouts. We don't know how many are going to come out, or if any, and then they just kept coming. And they kept coming. And then we had something bigger than we anticipated on our hands. That was a watershed. Like any group of young people, our expectations were high. In these next 4 or 5 years, we're going to fundamentally change the way this world is and how we're treated. Obviously, we're still at that.
It was really about how can we turn this around? How can we really affect change more than just one person at each school?
I believe in my heart that there's an indigenous concept called chinachli. You plant the seed, and that seed will grow.
Different staffs that come from different pueblos and different nations and different communities from the entire continent, the entire hemisphere. And this one represents Tucson. Despite everything that has happened, everything that has changed, everything that has evolved, we continue to hold our ceremonial staffs to try to maintain and preserve our traditional ways of life of the Mexicano. You hear a lot of talk about La Conquista de Mexico. Well, guess what? It never happened, right? This is proof of that.
They try to teach you that our peoples were ignorant, illiterate, savages, cannibals, sacrifice, all this stuff. They teach you to think that we're somehow, we don't belong here, or that maybe we're part of a new culture or something, that we're brand new, that we just got here. Well, I'm here to tell you that your culture is at least 7,000 years old. Let's go. In Lakesh, tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, if I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. There's so many rules at a school. There's rules of classroom rules, there's code of conduct at a school rules, there's district rules. So those are my rules. They're not really rules. They're a way of living. We must vigorously search within ourselves by silencing the distractions and obstacles in our lives in order to be warriors for our gente and justice. Quetzalcoatl, precious and beautiful knowledge, gaining perspective on events and experiences our ancestors endured, allows us to become more fully realized human beings.
At first, I really didn't accept it. I didn't accept just the posters up on the wall. I didn't know what most of them meant.
Now, this is the 4 Tezcalipocas, or the Nahualin, the 4 movements of being a good human being. It comes from Central Mesoamerica, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecs. Tezcalipoca is critical reflection. Anytime something happens to you, you have to ask yourself, how am I at fault? Only through reflection and reconciliation, forgiveness. If you hate your dad, you are hating yourself. But by forgiving your father, who else do you forgive?
Yourself.
Yourself, and now you become whole. Now we can create positive change.
What they show us, how they teach us, it's really different from regular classes. It means knowing where you came from, who you are inside. It really got to my emotions too.
From there, you have this precious knowledge. What do you need to do? Take action. Huitzilopochtli. Positive action. When someone's being made fun of, don't sit there and be quiet. Take positive action. Raul, that was messed up, man. You shouldn't be saying that. I'm not cool with that. Through reflection, reconciliation, stability as a human, action, a new world, a new person.
If you can narrow down what we advocate for, it's the idea of love. It's not simply a love for myself, the love for those around me. How can I change the world for the better? And what this idea of social justice pedagogy asks us to do is to seek the root of the truth. And in that truth, there is greater justice.
European Americans make up 70% of the U.S. population, right? What percentage do you think they're doing time? 30? 31%.
I teach American government with a social justice perspective. This class is based on critical thinking. Students are often taught to read the word, and Paulo Freire said, you have to teach students to read the world. And in order to make change, you have to look at the structure, the institution.
African Americans make up 12% of the population, right? Yet they make up what percent of the jail population? 41%.
Wow.
Yeah. There is a bias in this system. Now, can we create change with the system? Yes, we can.
What they started teaching us was so interesting. I just could not stop thinking about it. I would go home with articles and I would just read them over and over again. So now that I'm learning more, it's becoming more important to me. I started getting A's and B's.
They passed a rule. They raised the standards. What did this African American coach do? He walked off the court. No pass, no play. It doesn't only affect minorities. It affects poor white kids. Who can explain how that happens?
The policy is not asking you to have an A, it's just asking you to pass. And everyone should pass their classes.
I still think
hold on.
I think every athlete should be able to push themselves. If you're white, black, Mexican, anybody, if you're rich or poor, it's not classes at all.
It's exactly what he said. It depends how dedicated you are.
It's not about, you keep saying if you're dedicated, you can do it. If you're dedicated, you can do it. If it's all on the individual, you don't have a 4.0, then are you not dedicated? It's kind of like saying, if I run fast enough, I can fly. It's not gonna happen. There's something in place that's stopping them from achieving their goals. It's not to say that some people won't break past that and somehow do it, but what's the likelihood of that?
Monitor the way you think. When you start looking and blaming the person, that's a naive consciousness.
Everybody take out so far from God, because we're going to read a little bit today. My class is the literature component, and it's called Latino literature. Why do we think this is a church? Why do you think this is a Catholic church, just from the cover?
Because it looks like it's in Mexico.
A church in Mexico. Southwest, even better. This looks like home, right? This looks like where you from. It's a Chicano novel, right? I just want to give you a little taste of what you're in. You are in a world called magical realism, okay? And it is a little bit different than fantasy. Because, when you go to Lord of the Rings, everything's magical. When you go to Wizard of Oz, everything's magical. But in here, it's like, I got dumped by my novio, and now my sister is flying to the top of the roof. Now, why does that make sense for our gente? Why did it make sense that Latin America was the place where this happened?
I think it's something really big for me because I had the opportunity with Raza Studies to understand my cultura.
You have a big reading to do.
I was always the quiet girl in the back that I don't want to talk. I don't know what this is about. I'm scared to talk. One of the Mexicans sitting in the back, just sitting there. But he tends to teach us how to express ourselves so we could have that confidence.
The topics are environment, economic, and dehumanization.
analyze it as a group and see why we put it in that.
Ever since she studied these raza study classes, oh my God, it's made such big of a change. Her junior year, when she started those classes, it just completely changed.
She was not an empowered Chicana of the 21st century. She walked in here, and she certainly is now.
Cool? Does that make some sense? What's this? Oh, is that for their thing? Oh, that's cool.
With the tough kids, the ones with the thicker shells, you honor that they come to your classroom. And I know a lot of teachers are hesitant to use the word fun or entertaining, but I'm sorry. I'm going to use the gifts that I have, and if I can make them laugh, I'm going to make them laugh.
Some say the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. I say the darker the flesh, the deeper the roots. Juice and roots are not true, is not true rhyme. The slant rhyme allows you to have more freedom because back in the day when hip hop was starting, it was all true rhyme, right? It's like, you know, like we be cool, we go to school, we're gonna go swim in the pool. You know, all that fat boys kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it was like that. Wasn't it like that? It was like that. It was pretty cheesy.
I mean, really, how many teachers do you meet like that?
So then, yeah, it's like tricky and stuff, right?
Just to have him like down and like dancing in class and like throwing jokes and making fun of you, you start getting used to it. You're like, okay, this is him, this is his personality. You know, he does this so he can connect with you on a level. That way, you guys can just. I just feel comfortable here. You know, it's like a second home, I guess you could say. I mean, I hate it when I can't be here.
I fell in love with the classes because we learned so much.
In every other class, I mean, you're just thinking about, oh, let's get this work done.
By the book, by the book, by the book, by the book.
But in this class, like, there's meaning to that work.
Let's get to work. Roll up your sleeves, and it's time to work.
They expect more from you. They challenge us more. They challenge me more.
I've never pulled an all-nighter for any other class.
Because now I'm writing about something that I actually care about. I get to choose the subject I want to write about.
Who should have a say?
We should!
You should have a say, absolutely. No, say it loud, exactly. Exactly.
It's something I need to do for my gente and my ancestors and me.
Are schools part of the community or is the community part of the school? We choose the latter. Our communities need to be part of the school.
My colleagues and I, we're like a family. And then our students, as they come through, are very much like a family. So if they're family, then obviously your family.
Hey, what's up? How are you doing? Good. I'm glad you made it. Is everyone else here?
You want to meet my mom?
Yeah, sure. Love to meet your mom, yeah.
You're his favorite teacher.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. He
has nothing but very good things to say about you.
Well, thank you.
He talks nonstop.
Is that right?
My parent told me, she says, Doc, you know what? In the previous 11 years of my son's education, never did he come home and talk to me about what he was learning in school. I can't get him to shut up about this stuff.
Live, this is News 4 Tucson at 10.
State School Superintendent Tom Horn wants to end ethnic studies programs in the Tucson Unified School District. He's taking his push to state lawmakers next week, a bill that would ban schools from grouping or teaching students based on their ethnic backgrounds.
When I was in high school in 1963, I participated in the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King said he wanted his son to be judged by the quality of his character and not the color of his skin. And I'm still fighting for that now, against what I believe to be something that is very wrong, which is dividing students up by ethnicity and treating them separately by ethnicity. I'm calling on Tucson Unified School District to shut down the ethnic studies program and start teaching kids to treat each other as individuals and not on the basis of what race they were born into. And, excuse me, the chanting behind us, I think, illustrates the rudeness that they teach to their kids. With ethnic studies, there's a desire to develop ethnic solidarity. This group, we're the Latinos, that other group, they're the African Americans, that other group, they're the Asian Americans, the other group, they're the Anglos, and so on. In the human being, there is a primitive part that is tribal, and that will say, I want to be with members of my own tribe, members of my own race, and that sort of thing. And the function of civilization and the function of our public school system is to get people to transcend that. And there are better ways to get students to perform academically and to want to go into college than to try to infuse them with racial ideas.
So do you think you don't think they're doing anything right then?
I really don't. No, I think they should be abolished.
Hey, Bonnie, how are you doing?
Good, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Hey, y'all, let's get the room into Tlatocan, please.
Shine light on the cockroaches and watch them scatter. La Raza, the race studies, teaching Tucson students to hate America. What a great use of our tax dollars. This man should be fired and then tarred and feathered. I pay taxes to TUSD and I'm outraged.
In the light that we're in, this political light, we are accused, ironically, of being racist. And that's the total antithesis of what we believe. Do we talk about race in this class? Do we talk about class? Do we talk about sexism? We talk about all systems of oppression, but that doesn't necessarily make us sexist, does it? Or classist, but they like to throw racist at us.
Okay, now let's not. There's two phrases that kind of get people all excited in this town. One's derechos humanos, and the other one's raza studies. So just always carry yourself very respectfully and don't engage. Okay, don't engage with them. If they say ugly things, and they try to incite you to engage with them, just ignore it. Walk in, get your education on, and walk out proudly. Okay.
Let's get to work. How do we fix societal problems? Now, specifically, how do we fix societal problems in our school? From this are going to come your research projects, right? Finding the causes and then offering solutions. Let's roll.
How can we improve the language discrimination situations which impact foreign individuals?
My group is working on language discrimination,
military recruitment, segregation within the school,
how security treats students.
How can THS stop making the students
feel intimidated
by
police and security on campus?
All right, we need to work on that.
I know. I'm trying to find out, what can be changed and what does the average person think.
What do you guys think? Because you came from Washington, but you were from Korea.
Yeah.
In kindergarten or third, they wouldn't let us speak Spanish.
Another thing that we discovered is that the further west that you are, where there's less trees and less places to sit, is where African American, Mexican American, Chicanos, that's where they all hang out. They all kind of congregate in their own groups there.
So it's kind of we kind of resorted back to our old ways. We had the segregation and the race riots and everything. Then we had this moment of 70 hippie weed peace, and then we went to 2009 and we're back to segregation again. So one of our main solutions is our Unity Festival, which was it's just a big party where there's food, there's different, there's MCs, there's rappers, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on where everyone's just uniting.
Have to get the peanut butter up and dance like it would not be another time to jam. And if you feel like peanut butter up your hands, I'll put up your hands and put them high. The 26 is on the ride, swinging side to side, that's how we gon' ride it. And when them dudes like it, they gon' ride it. Let them ride, let them ride, let them ride.
My heart piston pumps at an abnormal beat when I hear her speak.
I'm not a vine with negative intentions. I am the sun creating divine intervention.
Presente a mi gente y un lugar magnífico donde quepan muchos mundos inseparables y los derechos humanos sean impreguntables. Un presidente que los represente. Somos un pueblo organizado.
but leadership of TUSD you've been critical?
Well, what I've been critical of is the ethnic studies program. I think it's immoral, I think it's wrong, it's ethically wrong to divide kids up by their ethnicity and teach them separately according to their ethnicity.
So you are trying to shut this program down for the reasons you just outlined. Now, proponents of these programs say this helps to energize kids because they are learning through the eyes of people who they see as themselves.
Well,
as a white man, you perhaps cannot understand the experiences that these kids are feeling in their hearts as a Hispanic or an African American.
Well, that's the exact opposite of my philosophy. We don't see ourselves through what race we were born into or what gender we are. We see ourselves as individuals. We're proud Americans. There are a lot better ways to energize students academically other than dividing them up by race.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 1108 authorizes the Superintendent of Public Instruction to withhold public monies and take regulatory action if a public school is found to include curriculum that is in conflict with the values of American citizenship.
There's no reason for people from other countries to have to come here to this country and learn about their own cultures, where they came from.
If you want a different culture, then fine, go back to that culture. But this is America.
We find hate and revolution is being taught in their books.
It's a very anti-American, hateful, hate speech.
Mexico, I believe, is orchestrating this, and they have an agenda known as La Reconquista, the Reconquest, or Aztlán. Many of our Chicano elected officials, I believe, are working directly for Mexico and the takeover.
I am offended by the tone of the rhetoric, and I disagree with the underlying premise of this proposal. I vote no.
I vote no.
And therefore I vote no. I do vote yes on this book.
And so for that reason, I will vote yes.
I vote aye. So I will just agree with them and vote aye.
Anyway, by your vote of 9 ayes, 6 nays, 2 absent, you have passed Senate Bill 1108 as amended.
We have another bill on the agenda that will be Senate Bill 1069.
Mr. Chairman, what's being done down here in Tucson Unified School District is teaching of hate speech, sedition, anti-American. If people want to pay for that on their own dime in their homes, they can be as anti-American as they want. But they won't use my tax dollars to do it.
To answer your question, it doesn't teach us to be anti-American. It teaches us to embrace America, all of its flaws and all. But certain things like racism and certain things like oppression, they do exist. And we go for these classes first off from hearsay, because people that have graduated and gone to these classes have said nothing but positive things. They figured out who they really are as human beings. They figured out how to handle situations to their best abilities. So the word anti-American isn't even relevant in our classes.
Thank you. You're very articulate and eloquent.
Thank you.
Is it true that this program has actually invited you to go to the classes and you have not gone yet?
They have not invited me.
I just find it very hard to believe you, Mr. Horn, because actually I've heard that they did, and we'll have testimony on that.
There was a teacher who invited me, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Horn, you're trying to eliminate ethnic studies without actually going to the classrooms. I'm just astounded that we would do something like this.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from the program itself. Augustine Romero, would you please come forward and tell us a little bit about the program?
In terms of how we interact with students and parents and community, it's about understanding, respect, and appreciation. That has led to the place where our students perform academically much better than the students not in our courses. That's something that should be applauded.
Well, the textbook that you use, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. My understanding is that if you go and look at the citations, you see Marx, Lenin, Mao, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro. And so our suspicion is inside these classes, these students are being indoctrinated by people who are in power to have a certain mindset of us versus them.
But the essence of that book is about humanity, about creating stronger humanity, greater humanity.
Well, that's our suspicion. We really think we know what's going on in behind those doors. The people in power are doing something distasteful.
Members, by your vote of 4 ayes, 3 nays, 0 not voting, you have given Senate Bill 1069 a do pass recommendation.
My sense of it is that they were bringing these kids in and saying, okay, founding fathers are racist, these social systems are stacked up against you, you know, look at these statistics, look at all these odds were against you. You can't plant evil ideas in kids' minds and expect healthy outcomes.
Do I indoctrinate my students? I can be accused of doing that, as can others, but I do not. And I firmly believe that. Have I ruffled feathers? Absolutely. In this class, we were taught to read the word as well as what? Read the world. Paulo Freire wrote about that a lot. Read the world. Read it. And you're going to see that it's not a pretty place. Since 1991, school districts throughout the United States have been going back to neighborhood schools, segregated schools. Because if you live in a poor side of town, you're going to go to that school. And that school isn't going to get the funding due to the property taxes. If you live on the rich side of town, you're going to go to a well-funded school.
What kind of cultural seeds are we planting here? That these systems aren't fair, that these American systems aren't fair. And let me tell you, I know from personal experience that there are systems that we have set up that aren't perfect. But what you have in the United States is more opportunity, more prosperity than you could ever dream of.
Our department is the thorn in people's side because we say, you know what? The things you're saying about the trajectory of this country, about where we're at, the idea that race is no longer an issue, what we're saying is BS.
It's about the freedom to ask the questions that are the most pertinent in the way they view the world. That's what we're doing. That's freedom.
Some people are claiming because of Obama being the president now, that we have reached what Martin Luther King died for, and that's the idea that people be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Have we reached that? No. Have we? Yeah. Yes, we have. Right? Have we?
So I believe that regardless of political party, mainline Republicans, mainline Democrats, independents, all people would be outraged if they knew what was happening in this TUSD Ethnic Studies Department. The schools are turning these kids into angry young radicals. Schools are supposed to teach the kids to think for themselves, not to indoctrinate them into left-leaning views of teachers. And I'm speaking out because I think if the people get the facts, I think they will be outraged at this.
They feel that they are so entrenched within TUSD that they are untouchable.
I mean, this is outrageous stuff. I mean, we would never support hate groups such as the KKK in our school system. We would never tolerate that kind of garbage.
We want to talk about the stuff that nobody talks about. They never cover our classes. They don't go inside them. They don't investigate, and all we get is this John Justice, Tom Horn, media blitz that says we're racist, we're hateful, and we're all the things we're not. We're getting jacked on the message. The narrative, if you will, has been hijacked.
He's saying that this is American culture and ethnic studies is not part of it. I mean, that's a radical thing for him to say. Our argument is, no, actually, we're part of that, and he's forced us out. Him and the rest of society has forced us out. So we're talking about what message are we putting together. I mean, that's the message that we can say. We are being told that we're not part of this culture, and so that we're being banished. And we're saying, no, put us back in, include us,
We're supposed to be on the offensive here, but not direct, not in people's faces. Because if we get in their faces, Republicans or whoever, our opposition, then they will attack us harder and stronger and rally their base. And we cannot win that fight. That's why we need to take the high route right now.
Community, service, and advocacy. Service, serving each other, being there for one another, in la calle. All right? and advocacy. That idea, we see la push, the idea of the will to get out there and do things, not just complain about them, not just vote. Get your puppies on the ground and get your body in some spaces to help people on the daily.
It started getting me into that way of like, I gotta do more community events and see what's really going out there.
These are the people who were recovered this last year. There were 183.
We walked in memory of the deaths that there was in the desert from Mexico and Salvador and Guatemala from last September. 183 of them did not make it. So we walk in memory of them since it's Dia de los Muertos. José Santos Rodríguez Sánchez. Presente. José Ángel Alfaro Salón. Presente. Olivín Noel Hernández. Presente. Jesús Enrique Barrera Morales. I can't be another Latina woman just like sitting down at home. I want my voice to be heard.
Running has always been a part of the ceremonial way of life of indigenous people. It requires that physical discipline and allows you to become focused and be connected to the earth. And this staff here represents Tucson, and it represents each and every one of you. It serves as a testigo to those things that are taking place.
We're running from Tucson to Phoenix to bring our prayer and our message to save the education of future children, the education of our children, our own education.
It's almost a meditation. You listen and you hear rhythms, you know, your heart, you know, the sweat coming down your face, your feet touching the ground.
When we got to the Atham reservation, we had to ask their permission if we were allowed to run on their land, and they accepted and they ran with us.
We want to thank you, Creator, for giving us this opportunity to express ourselves. It is important, Creator, what you have taught us so that our children will be knowledgeable about all the things that are around them. And it is important that they should learn them in their own culture, in their own ways.
Thank everybody that ran, because it shows that no matter how far this bill goes, we're here together in the lucha. And it will never end because we will always be united as one.
Did you know, had law enforcement enforced our immigration laws, we would have averted 9/11?
We have seen parts of our neighborhoods nuclear bombed by the effects of illegal immigration.
This is hate speech. This is anti-American, seditious, revolutionary talk in a high school.
Make sure you don't end up dead in a desert because you are trying to steal another man's country.
Are you threatening us?
Once we are awakened to our danger, we are very, very skilled at warfare.
You say you're going to kill us here?
You see the line there? You stay on the outside of that line. You get away from my border. I'll beat the shit out of both of you. You got it? You stay outside my border.
We get everything from physical threats, death threats on the email, on our telephones.
We looked at all the negative comments that were being posted up at the Arizona Daily Star and the Tucson Citizen and like at the radio station, and it was just so much hate, and you had to keep, you know, being positive, and it's very tough sometimes because we try to live life and in a positive way, and why is all this negativity from, you know?
I'll bring this to a personal level. I cannot operate with any kind of degree of hate or animosity towards Tom Horn, because then I would be exactly what he says we are. We are not truly about love, we're about something else.
These classes teach about forgiveness and understanding, but it's so hard to take it to a personal level.
They talked about my classroom in the National Review, which is a conservative, very reputable conservative magazine. It was the online edition. So I'm sure there's people that you know, don't like us, are critical of us all over the country. There's plenty of things said about me, plenty of hurtful things. Some of you, Antonio, I have this whole beautiful monologue. I don't have the name of whoever you interviewed. Was it your tío? Yeah, they no name there.
There were days where Acosta would come in and his smiles weren't as bright, or, you know, all those cliches. He's kind of just in here and, you know, let's do what we got to do, guys, you know.
Thesis is what? The main idea of what? Main idea of what? Your topic? Main idea of what?
Oh, I could see his frustration. You know, it's affecting my teacher who's, you know, being told by some guy that you're teaching, you're not teaching this right, it's not important, you shouldn't be teaching it.
Because you turn this on with herb spelled U-R-B, so I know that's not me. I really feel like I have to catch you up if I have you 11 and 12. I have to catch you up in those 2 years for all the mistakes that were made from K to 10. So it's a tremendous amount of pressure for me that I personally put on myself.
What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be reviewing 8th grade American government. Information that you, as an educated citizen, should know. What was our first Constitution called?
In Lakesh, tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, if I do harm to you, me hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. Descalipoca, self-reflection, smoking mirror. We must vigorously search within ourselves by silencing the distractions and obstacles in our lives in order to be warriors for our gente and justice. We're honored that you're here, and it means a lot to us. We've rarely had any folks from the legislature come into our space, so we're very honored that you've taken it upon yourself to do so.
The fear is that when people look at the La Raza program, they're very concerned that you're breaking away from those traditions that we know resulted in freedom, that we know resulted in prosperity. There's a real fear when we see books like The Pedagogy of the Oppressed that we're going, you know, that's Marxist, Leninist, collectivist. And that's part of the fear that people have about the kind of studies.
But the civil rights movement was something that everybody was afraid of, right?
Well, some were. Some other people.
Most people were afraid of that.
Yeah, I think there was concern. It's legitimate to say there was concern
a
at
lot.
that time. Yeah.
Right. That's it.
Yeah. You know, when I was growing up, we were short on food, but we never felt that we were oppressed, because when you say the word oppressed, it means somewhere there's an oppressor.
What it's about is the American culture has an outline for every single one of us. And that is an oppression. It is an oppression on all of us.
Just stereotypes and people that, see me, the way I dress, the way I look. And I started believing that, I started thinking, I'm a Chicana, I ain't gonna be able to graduate, I'm gonna have kids young, like that. And then I started coming to these classes and I started seeing, why am I believing all this? Instead of believing it, I should change it.
But when I look up at the wall and I see a poster of Che Guevara, who many of us think was a thug, and I don't see anything on Benjamin Franklin, I have a problem.
It's the decor of the classroom.
Well, it's...
At the same time, President Franklin also warned the country, the darkening of the country, and he was against inclusion of the Tani people. So,
it's not a disregard of those founding fathers, but we try to encourage in our students and facilitate a process where we have the courage to examine our history for what it is.
I just want to thank you for coming to these classes and seeing what they're about.
Well, I appreciate your comments too, and for you, it takes a little bit of courage to speak when the TV camera's rolling, and so I want to thank you for talking and speaking your mind. It was...
Well, thanks for coming, a lot of people are against don't really come and see what they're about, and I think that was cool,
Okay.
That was good. Thanks.
Well, you have a good day.
You too.
I didn't think that my visit there that day was a typical day. I think it was more a discussion that took place. I wasn't seeing anything that represented a typical day whatsoever. I thought the teacher himself, he is, I might disagree with him on the cultural aspect, but he comes in there, he's perfectly groomed, he's wearing a long sleeve white shirt, he's wearing a tie. So from that standpoint, the way he presented himself, his obvious passion for educating kids, he's presenting classic American values. Now again, was that on show for me? That's a question that remains to be answered. Tom Horn has expressed an interest in the Attorney General's job. I myself have opened up an exploratory committee for Superintendent of Public Instruction. Superintendent of Public Instruction oversees all the schools in Arizona. It has the #1 leadership role for education policy and educational leadership.
Mr. Chairman, members, House Bill 2281 prohibits public schools from offering courses or classes which promote overthrowing the U.S. government or resentment towards a race or class of people. Additionally, it allows the superintendent of public instruction to determine if a public school is in violation relating to the prohibited courses.
I personally do not feel that students should be taught victimization.
Have you been in the classroom and you witnessed this, or is this hearsay?
I have not been in the class.
I represent Tucson Unified School District. You're insinuating that the schools teaching the overthrow of the government and the
evidence that I've seen, textbooks that they're using, overwhelmingly show that that is the case.
Have not witnessed any of it. Based on hearsay.
I think I can perhaps provide some guidance on this issue. The students asked me to come down to the classroom. While I was in the classroom, the founder of La Raza started talking about Benjamin Franklin being a racist. And I think it's completely inappropriate to trash our founding fathers who put their lives on the line for our freedom and prosperity. I vote aye.
I vote aye. And so because of that, I vote aye.
By your vote of 4 ayes, 3 nays, and 0 not voting, you've returned House Bill 2281 to the full Senate with a due pass recommendation.
Escucha, estamos en la lucha. Ya Brewer, escucha, estamos en la lucha. Ya Brewer, escucha, estamos en la lucha. Ya Brewer, escucha, estamos en la lucha.
We gotta fight for what we know is right, and right now, this is what is beautiful to all of us.
We stand here today with and for our community in peaceful protest to the most hateful legislative session in our state's history. And we stand here today for the stories and history of our families, abuelitos, abuelitas, and antepasados who have walked this continent freely for thousands of years have given their strength of their backs and hands to build this United States and sacrifice their own blood in defending this country. Regardless of what anybody else says, we have taught you love. And I would like to ask my current and former students to join me in reciting the part of Luis Valdez's poem, En la Quech, that we say each day before our classes begin. En la Quech,
Tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, if I do harm to you, te hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself.
We will win.
Human chain.
Yes.
Signed over there.
Hi.
Mister.
This picture right here says 1,000 words. The class itself is just one piece, but when you have students demonstrating wearing brown shirts, bandanas, and sunglasses, this is serious. To me, this is very serious. We are teaching kids to hate the very country that they're living in.
Students are being taught a revolutionary curriculum.
You mentioned the group in the uniforms there, and I spoke to one of them last week, and it's a movement in the barrio. Isn't something like that, if they're saying it's not militant but more a matter of unity together, to stay in school and to succeed, is that a threat?
I mean, we're learning about people that are dressed up in masks over their face, sunglasses over their eyes, berets, so that you can't see anything on their face, brown shirts, clearly revolutionary costumes. And anybody who says that kids can't learn unless they're subject to that kind of militancy is the clearest example of racism that I could think of.
Our education's under attack. What do we do?
Stay on the sidewalk. If you have an empty water bottle, we're trying to get trash bags right now. We don't want to make a mess right now.
The people united will never be divided. The people united will never be divided.
After a while, people just got sick and tired because we always did like protests and rallies, but nothing has happened. Like they haven't listened to us, they haven't done anything. The bill got passed. So we decided to go past what we usually do. You know, something new is always unexpected.
We just got word that Tom Horn is holding a press conference at downtown State Building. So we're thinking about moving this over there. Is everybody down with that? Yeah! Come on. What do we want? Justice! What do we want? Yes! What do we want? Justice!
How you doing?
Hi. This is a public building?
Yeah, we can't come in here. I can't come in here. You guys keep asking you.
We demand that HB 2281 and HB 27 be immediately repealed. A people can only remain oppressed for so long before they rise from the shadows. If these demands are not met, organized direct action and community organizing will continue.
This is not a way that Hispanic parents want their children to act in a militant way to get ahead in this country, and to be angry and to feel oppressed and to think that this country is looking at ways to make them feel downtrodden, but to lift them up and to make them feel empowered.
I have 3 younger sisters. I want them to have these classes. We've been at the 1010. We've been running to Phoenix. We've been protesting, walking. And it's something that Arizona is becoming just a racist state, period.
I take it as a no. You don't want to leave?
Whose state? Our state. Whose state? Our state. Whose state? Our state.
Whose classes?
Our classes.
Whose classes?
Our classes.
Whose classes?
Our classes.
Have you actually been in one of these classes?
It's my view that if I were to come into the class that it would affect what was taught there, and I would not get a true picture. And then if I was asked what went on in the class, I'd have to say, well, it was just this benign class.
You would get a dog and pony show. I would not get what they would see every day. I'd have to do a drop-in unannounced. And then still, they could change their pedagogy that quickly and the methodology. I think this picture depicts what these kids are learning.
Thank you all for coming.
I have a state police representative here.
He is representing.
Okay?
This isn't about police.
I understand. Your issues with Tom Horn, he's gone, he left.
The kids wanted to speak to him.
But what
Where's
purpose
the
are you
justice?
What purpose is it here, sitting here, just sitting here?
In
Up to
this
this
state
point,
of Arizona, sir, we have been trying to be reasonable with Tom Horn. We've asked for him to come into our classes and talk to us, and he was in this office invited, and still would not speak to the students. So we have no other option here.
Education's not a crime. 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 Education's not a crime.
So we were there to make a stand that we do not support that bill. That is a racist bill against some ethnic studies classes.
4 underage high school students and 11 adults arrested in all.
Again, 15 people arrested in total, 4 juveniles, 11 adults. They were cited as well, and they have a court date coming up on June 7th. Meanwhile, they all tell me they say it was worth it to make this strong statement.
We need to be heard. We have a message. We have a purpose here. We have an objective, and we're going to do what we need to do in the struggle to achieve that.
I think your struggle as a human being to be a good human being has begun, and I will always hold you to that. Always look in the mirror. Look at your heart. Know your heart. Have Quetzalcoatl, that precious knowledge of who you are as a human being.
So, today's kind of hard, but it's a beautiful thing too, because I'm so proud of you. So that's like a lot of the emotions. It's just a ton of pride. To this day, we have to endure hateful comments. I've been attacked and hated, and as well as you. And you were the ones that made it all worth it.
Thank you for being, the maestro in this class, and, like, mentoring us and just being, that father figure to some of us. And, I do have a father and mother, I have my parents, but they don't understand me like the way you do or any of these people do.
For someone that's felt so out of place for the majority of their life, it feels good to have a home. You guys are the people who inspire me to try to be better. Thank you guys for everything.
The struggle hasn't ended, and it will never end. But it will continue because of us, our generation. When they try to take these classes away, it's something impossible. I want my little sisters to be able to come to this class and feel like I felt. They can't take it away. They can't.
There were profound inequalities in our country based on race and gender. These issues still exist today, although together we've made great strides.
Priscilla Rodriguez. Gilbert Esparza.
Crystal Paola Enriquez.
Congratulations! You have earned admissions to the University of Arizona for fall 2009 as an undecided major in the University College. You have been chosen because your academic and personal achievements qualify you for the U of A's. You know, when I was little, college was always like something that I wanted to do, but it never really seemed like a possibility. For my dad, for him to actually know that I'm in college, I know that he's very proud and that he feels accomplished inside.
I got a hummingbird representing Huitzilopochtli, the will to act, and it's connected to a flower where I saw that more as being the movement, and I'm just the hummingbird slurping that, the power of the rose, so I could have the will to act in my community, and I just put my last name on top of it. So.
Think about it. We're all human. We all got hearts that beat. We all got, minds that think. And people don't treat each other like we're humans. They treat others like they're animals, like they shouldn't be a part of this society. But, we create a society, a dystopia where we oppress each other and we don't really appreciate one another. But, we're all human. What's the big deal? Whether it be our color, I just believe in one race, the human race.
Precious and beautiful knowledge. Gaining perspective on
events and experiences our ancestors endured allows us to become more fully realized human beings.
We must listen to each other and others with humility and love
in order to hear the indigenous wisdom in our hearts.
The will to act. As we grow consciousness, we must be willing to act with a revolutionary spirit that is positive, progressive, and creative.
I will follow up with you, Jose, about the next June, because I'm curious. I'm a tickled pink, as people say. I'm very curious to go and visit and learn more about how we can.
I will invite both of you, okay?
Yeah, replicate and create schools that following schools that were a great model, right? And thank you also for the quote from Mao. Yes, that's a very important piece, and Frank Zeno too. That those references are historically, being important. Those thinkers, intellectuals. Yeah. So thank you, and thank you for both of you for being with us today. I think I still want to continue the conversation, but for today's purpose, I'm going to stop. And I know, Camille, I will be in contact with you through the Paulo Freire, the student special interest group. And Jose, I really hope I can be in touch with you more often and just learn more from you about the Puerto Rican independence movement, this and the betterment of schools here in Chicago, and so I do thank you both for all your contributions today. Okay.
Good to see you. Gracias.
Okay.
Obrigada.
Yes. Ok, de nada. Abraço aos dois.
Abraço.
Tudo bom. Thank you.
Paulo Freire é educação. Pensar transforma, muda, é abolição. Freiriana é sua missão. Pensar transforma, muda, é evolução. O conhecimento liberta, vamos transformar. Educar o mundo de dentro pra fora, interpretar.